Domain-driven design. Every developer must know about this topic, or at least have it as part of their toolset. If it's so important, then why is it so hard to learn? I'm not going to cover a full explanation of what DDD is in this video, but as a very, very brief summary, if you're doing a very large or complex project, then it's very beneficial to at least know the thinking or the theory behind DDD. Domain-driven design came around in 2003. Eric Evans wrote a book, Tackling Complexity in the Heart of Software. So just to put the book in context, it's meant to be a high-level guide, not specific to any programming language or framework. So it's meant to be on a slightly higher level than, for example, design patterns. More on a philosophy of solving a problem on the problem domain, forcing the developer to really have his or her code reflect the problem domain. Now, what are some of the challenges? I mean, in general, the book is said to be hard to read and digest. So most people have raised issues like it's a little bit too long. So the author is using words that might be too verbose, or some sections or points could be made a little bit more directly. The core concepts are still unnecessarily difficult. Could have been more simpler. The first issue is that the original ideas from the author are a little bit difficult to understand. So there's new terminology that is invented and doesn't make immediate sense. As an example, if I was to ask a very good developer, what do each of these terms mean? A shared canal, conformist, anti-corruption layer, without having to read the book like 5 times, it might be difficult to sort of have a very educated guess as to what they mean. The second issue is that there are no concrete coding examples. It follows on from the first one that you have a lot of high-level terminology that leaves the reader with just a lot of abstract ideas. The third issue is that there was only really one author of this concept that's meant to be sort of quite important. And there wasn't any group brainstorming wasn't a lot of developers that sort of sat together and brainstormed a couple of ideas. So there's it was peer reviewed as a book, but in terms of the actual concepts, they weren't really refined. It wouldn't be a problem if the first 2 issues were resolved. This is in contrast with some popular patterns that have gained traction, such as design patterns. It was literally 4 guys, the gang of 4. It was literally 4 developers that sat and developed those design patterns that are quite popular. Similar thing with Scrum. There was actually an Agile manifesto. It was more than 5 developers or 5 software developers that would have been involved in software. The fourth issue is that if you're learning domain-driven design, you're going to need a whole lot of materials that are not from the original author. So you're going to need to read a whole lot of books, watch a lot of videos, and all of these is some other person other than the original author explaining, sort of trying to simplify or fill in the gaps. And this leaves the learner with a lot of unnecessary work, because it should have been clear from the start. You're being left with a burden. The burden of understanding is thrown to the learner. It must actually be the other way around. The author must just make sense immediately. So then what is my final opinion of domain-driven design? I think it's a very important design philosophy, and every software developer must take the time to learn about this topic. And it mustn't just be ignored because it's difficult and the terminology is a little bit confusing. However, there is a big gap in terms of the original book being a little bit abstract and the gap in trying to close it to being understandable relatively quickly in a way that's sort of you can have a concrete implementation. DDD doesn't have to be implemented in its purest form. And in other videos, I talk about how one can borrow some of the concepts and have a fully functional system.